My name is Anatol Lieven. I'm a professor at Georgetown University in Qatar. I am also a member of the Dialogue of Civilizations and of the New America Foundation in Washington, D.C. And I spent most of my career as a British journalist in various parts of the world, including South Asia and the former Soviet Union. Well, without false modesty, I think the book was right. It was very unpopular at the time. I was told by many people that there is no such thing as American nationalism. I haven't heard many people saying that since Trump was elected. What I do in the book is to identify what I take to be the two main strands of American nationalism, which I think, 12 years after the book first came out, were expressed very, very closely indeed by Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in last year's American presidential campaign. Clinton, a very, very strong American nationalist, but believing that American values are universal values, embodied best in the United States, that America has to be open to all people in the world, who are willing to accept its values, but also, of course, and this is the dangerous side of that kind of American nationalism, that America has both a duty and a right to spread democracy and freedom, if necessary by force of arms, in the world. So this is also very hawkish nationalism. Trump, equally nationalist, but reflecting a tradition which says, believes passionately in American values, or claims to, or thinks that it does, but believes that these are values for Americans, that non-Americans cannot share these values, that non-Americans threaten these values, and that non-Americans have to be excluded from coming to America, but also large categories of people within the country are also not really, in the full sense, Americans. So this is an exclusionary and chauvinist form of American nationalism. As far as what I called in the book the American nationalist thesis is concerned, this is what we have. And what we have, according to this tradition, is the American creed, and the religious overtones of this are quite explicit. We have the best constitution in the world, the best democracy, the best legal system, and so forth and so on, which we wish to share with the rest of the world. The other side of American nationalism also believes that America has the best of all these things, but it also believes that there is such a thing as American culture, which is different from simply belief in the Constitution and so forth, and that this culture has changed greatly over time. Originally it was white Protestant, then it became white Christian, then it became white Judeo-Christian. Now it's even opened up, but it's always been exclusionary. There have always been large numbers of people within the United States, as well as outside, who are excluded on grounds of race, but also on grounds of real or perceived culture. So a belief that there is such a thing as an American people, like a German people or whatever, with an American culture, that is highly characteristic of Trump and his followers. But this, you see, is not exclusive to America. Ever since the French Revolution, there have been two strands of French nationalism. Republican nationalism, which believes that France embodies universal values, of the rights of man, republicanism, etc., which are values for all mankind, as embodied in France. And there's always been another strand of French nationalism which says, no, to be French you have to be something more. As in America, this has changed over time. Originally it was you had to be Catholic and monarchist. Then it became you had to be Christian and conservative. And it was always a question of who you were not. You couldn't be a Republican, then you couldn't be a Jew. Today, if you look at Le Pen, it's still exclusionary, but you can be, it seems, almost anything as long as you're not Muslim. India, too, has, for most of the period since independence, had a form of official nationalism called Nehruite nationalism, after Jawaharlal Nehru, which believed that India embodied universal values, secularism, democracy, human rights, and that India represented these universal values in Asia. But there was always an opposing strand of Indian nationalism, which at the moment is dominant, which said no, the only true Indian is a Hindu. Everybody else is here at best on sufferance, but certainly has no right to shape the state or even to have any significant role in the state. First, I would say European countries should think again, first and foremost, of their own interests and their own values, starting with the interests of Germany and values of Germany as a constitutional state. In other words, there needs to be a certain distance placed. I do feel more and more that the idea of the West as a cultural unity it's not dead, but it's certainly vastly weakened compared to what it looked like a few years back. America is very significantly different in cultural and cultural political terms from Europe. So first, define the interests of Germany, but then of course, as a European country, as a country in the heart of Europe, Germany does also have to think about the interests of Europe as a whole, if only because those interests impinge directly on the interests of Germany. So craft a strategy along those lines, based on what one takes to be those interests. What I would say very strongly is it would be disastrous to try to track the United States, because Trump may not last. I mean, Trump could be impeached or forced to resign. One can see all the forces, gathering for this. If Germany follows Trump, down certain paths, and then Trump falls and is replaced by a very different, so then there is going to have to be another zigzag and another zigzag. That would be both deeply humiliating for European countries. But the other thing that I would say is that it is obviously not perhaps so important in Germany, which has a particular relationship with its Turkish minority, but no, actually now there are many other Muslims as well. But in countries like France and Britain, the integration of the Muslim minorities into a sense of British and French patriotism, or nationalism if you will, is probably the greatest challenge facing our democracies over the next 2-3 generations. You cannot do that if you are clearly behaving as a satellite of the United States. You cannot integrate people into a sense of nationhood if you are yourself behaving like a colony. And of course, the more you follow around a country which is itself behaving in an increasingly unpredictable and wildly different way, the more openly humiliating your dependence becomes. Belly or heart, if one wanted to be slightly, kinder about it. But yes, people were voting, on the basis of emotions. But emotions, of course, engendered by centuries of, what was a different, identity. After all, British patriotism is a very old and powerful force. English patriotism is older still. The idea that all of this was going to go away in the course of a few decades as a result of globalization was always profoundly foolish. The one thing I would say though is that it could be a mistake to see this as a vote for getting much closer to the United States, because of course, as one has seen at certain points, as during the Iraq War, there is also a great deal of suspicion of many aspects of the US and of US policy in Britain. And of course there are also very great cultural differences. And certainly Britain cannot follow Trump into the kind of Islamophobia that he and some of his supporters are expressing. I think that the basic dream of a great many ordinary British people is basically to be somewhere like New Zealand, or possibly Mauritius or Fiji. In other words, to be completely independent from everybody, and yet at the same time, of course, to be a kind of giant Fiji, a Fiji as a great power on the world stage. It's I mean, it's of course a complete fantasy. But I really do think that this is, it's not that Britain, or at least that many ordinary British people wish to see themselves simply as satellites of the United States. That is actually rather an uncomfortable feeling for many Brits. But then they also didn't want to be satellites of Germany either.